So, welcome to episode 17 of season 5. If you've just joined, this is Maria from @Maria the Arcane everywhere, and I'm joined by our overlordess, Robyn, at a tired witch everywhere.
The overlordess kills me. That's so good. We do have a few announcements this episode before we get into it too much. First and foremost, we are joined later this episode by Joanna Ebenstein of Memento Mori. It's her new book coming out, and Morbid Anatomy. I think that's what it's called. No, it's Morbid Anatomy. And she's going to talk to us about death, dying, and her new book. And it's really exciting, and I think it aligns a lot with what we as a book club just read last month. I think you're going to enjoy it. Maria, unfortunately, could not join us.
No,
womp, womp.
That was on mama duties.
That's
duties.
All right. The other announcement we have is it was just announced that Maria and I are going to be headlining next year at the Chicago Windy City Paranormal Fest.
Yeah.
We're so excited. We're going to be on stage doing a live episode and then hanging out. And we're going to be doing live tarot readings from like a little booth and stuff like that. It's going to be great. We're so excited. So we hope to see you there. Do check the caption of this episode because I will be posting the link so you can get your tickets and come hang out with us.
Yeah. Yes, please.
Yes, please.
And don't forget to join us November 30th at 12 p.m. PST for our latest class with Thorn Mooney, author of A Witch's Path and Witches Among Us. It's a class on getting unstuck as a witch. It's like when you're moving past that beginner stage and you're like, where do I go now? That's what this class is all about. So let's find out where you go next. But also, if you want to be featured on our Coffee Talk episodes, we now have a voicemail service where you can leave a little 3-minute voicemail. But if it goes longer than that, just call back and we'll piece it together. But if you want to call us and tell us your ghost stories or any kind of funny story you think the community would love to hear, that number is 351-207-0799. Yeah, come tell us your stories. We want to hear them.
Come tell us. We'd love to hear it. So let's get into it.
Yeah.
If you've just joined us this week, every week we talk about upcoming lunar phases and how you can utilize those in your magical practice. Now, in relationship to when this episode comes out, the nearest one to us is going to be on December 1st. It is the new moon in Sagittarius. I think personally that new moons in general, as we know, are all about beginnings. And aligning the Sagittarius sign with that specifically is a good time to focus on exploration, philosophy, and just kind of expanding our minds and our perspectives. So this is a good time, especially with it being at the end of the year, to be setting intentions and beginning work that aligns with kind of setting up your New Year's resolution, which I know is a little corny. People aren't really into that. But if your New Year's resolution is something that you've been kind of milling about, and it has been something that you're like, I want to learn a new language, or I want to go back to school, or I want to try a new form of divination or a new, path in magic and learn about this. This is a good time to kind of set that intention so that way magically you're aligned with the new year starting in a way that is going to be as expansive as possible. I don't know. I know that obviously Sagittarius is the end of the year. We have the new moon starting, or new year starting. But I do think that with it being a new moon specifically, it does really align with intention setting for the next year, setting yourself up, giving yourself that kind of purposeful foundation. What do you think?
Yeah. No, Absolutely everything you said. I completely agree. This moon is perfect for setting intentions for what you want to do next year. And I really like using Sagittarius for when it comes to going on adventures or wanting to start a new adventure. So if you're thinking about like traveling, moving, like do anything that is outside of your comfort zone, this is the moon to work with. And
so smart.
especially if you're like, you know, apprehensive or nervous, that Sagittarius energy kind of like pushes us to get past that. And so utilizing that energy is very, very helpful. But I know that it's not connected to this card, but it feels very connected to this card. I like to work with the Fool for when it's a Sagittarius moon, just because, as I said, new adventure, new things, and you're like kind of, you know, the Fool isn't scared about like the ups and downs of the journey. They're just excited to go on the journey. And so working with the Fool in that regard is a great idea during this new moon. But yeah, those are my thoughts.
And part of exploration and like wisdom, philosophy, all that is also with the closing of the year a good time to kind of reflect on what you have learned for the year and have gratitude for that. If you're somebody who's into gratitude journals, this might be the time. This might be the time to reflect on what you have learned this year, what you have grown from. The exploration already passed. So something just to consider, so that way we're closing out the new year with like a really good vibe and energy.
Yeah, no, I agree. Especially, you know, I feel like a lot of people, myself included, like we look back on what we have accomplished through the year. And like at the surface, we're probably like, oh my gosh, this year has been terrible. I didn't really accomplish much. But as soon as you start like writing it down, like the stuff that you went through, the hardships and everything that you faced, you know, there was still like these great moments sprinkled in between. And it's like, you know, it helps you kind of be a little bit happy about the good things that did happen and helps you not to view the year under such a negative lens.
Yeah. It's all about love and light, positivity, and reframing your mind to always see nothing but good. That's all you need to do. Just ignore all of it.
Don't ignore it.
That was a joke. For those who didn't pick up on what I felt was obvious sarcasm.
No. And if you're going to reflect, no, definitely just reflect on those bad
stuff
moments.
It all down. No, just move past them. Namaste. Love and light. Positivity. What is that thing that those people always say? The good vibes only.
Imagine only good vibing.
Couldn't be me.
No.
I will die a bitter, hateful bitch. I don't care. That's fine.
I'm fine being salty and angry.
That's fine. I'm fine with that.
50% of the time. Like, it's fine.
One of my friends recently said that she's in her 30s now, so she doesn't, like, be spiteful. And I'm like, I'm in my 30s now. I'm completely spiteful.
Way more spiteful than
like, what the fuck are you talking about? I'm not grown in that respect.
Oh no, I think, you know, standing up for yourself is so important. And I think that's a great lesson to learn when you're in your 30s, being like, I'm just not going to take any more bullshit. I'm not going to take any more bullshit.
Well, she's literally 30 now. And I'm like, give it a couple of years, babe.
It'll come back.
You'll come back.
It'll come back.
You'll come back.
So every episode we talk about tarot. Previous episodes we went over like individual meanings of cards. Last season we went over the whole sections in tarot, the major arcana, the minor, the queens, the aces, the whole shebang. This year we're concentrating on themes. And so the themes, we just think it's a great way to learn and build that storytelling aspect towards tarot, just so, you know, you can look out for it in your own readings and also, you know, maybe gain new perspective on the cards. But this week, the theme we wanted to concentrate on is not being your authentic self. Okay. So the first card I picked is the Empress reversed. Now, when the Empress is upright, she's all about like claiming her identity. Does her identity change from time to time? Absolutely. Does she always like represent the feminine? No, not always. It's just kind of like she invites you to claim who you are as a person and, display it, proudly. Now, since she's reversed, it shows like not having that self-care or self-love aspect enough to like claim that identity and to love who you are as like a whole person. Like this even comes to like how you view your body and how you view like your goals and the things that you're shooting for in life. Like it's just not feeling very proud about who you are, or like your identity is so shoved far down and you're like struggling to, to just exist because you're just like not being true to yourself. Okay. So the next card is Justice reversed. Now, I view justice a little bit differently. Well, definitely it can represent justice, like, law and order and things like that. It can also represent honoring our inner truth. And, justice carries a double-edged sword. And sometimes honoring our inner truth is, it's hard because you have to tell people this and you have to kind of like deal with their negativity about it while you're honoring your identity, honoring who you are. Now, when it's reversed, it's just, you're letting people's opinions and how they view you overrule your inner truth. Like, and once again, not being true to who you are is just creating a bunch of unbalance in your life. And, eventually I feel like this card, like when it's in a reverse aspect, can be very like, it's only going to get worse if you don't claim that identity. Like, because when people's opinions of you like keep happening, the other side of like the sword like gets sharper and sharper, and your side gets duller and duller because you're just letting people walk all over you. Now, the next card I picked is the 10 of Cups reversed. Now, upright, like, while it does symbolize, like, ultimate happiness, it also represents, like, what the conventional meaning of happiness is. And this means, like, families, like the whole nuclear family type thing. And reversed is kind of like honoring the aspect of, you just like to do things different. You don't want what the conventional is. You just want, maybe you're queer and you want, like to marry another woman. You want to marry another man. You want to, have a non-binary family. You want, to be polyamorous. Like happiness and ultimate happiness means so many different things to so many different people, and that should be celebrated. And while it is looked down on sometimes by the people who only like the 10 of Cups upright, like your happiness is still absolutely valid, no matter what those other people say, which I think is very important to hear right now. But how about you? What are your 3 cards?
Well, first of all, I'd like to point out that you picked all reversals and I got 1 upright. So I am very proud of that for myself. So the first one I picked is the Magician reversed. Upright, right? We have this full potential. We have all the tools that we need. And when we see it in reverse, you can see it as being like narcissistic, and in that narcissism of not being able to actually have all the tools, we have this disconnect, right? It also is lying to ourselves in ego that we can do something that we don't have the ability to do. And that's not being authentic. Like lying to ourselves, being narcissistic about things, et cetera, only sets ourselves up for failure, right? As opposed to being our true selves, as opposed to being honest about our capabilities and seeking out help from others. The next one I picked is the Queen of Swords reversed, because the Queen of Swords is the only queen that does not have a king. I'm not going to get into that right now, but it's her brother. Anyway. And in the Queen of Swords, she is so like, she knows herself. She is so true to herself. She makes decisions with confidence, and she brings down that sword with truth. And in reverse, there's a huge disconnect of the authenticity that we find with that upright self. She doesn't know herself. She wants to have that confidence, but she is not being true to who she is. She is playing other people's games. And in playing other people's games, it is the detriment not only to herself, but because she is a queen of her kingdom, of the people around her, the community she's trying to build. And the last one I picked, which is my upright, is the Seven of Swords, which is all about being lying. It's a liar card. I know that when we think about being authentic and not being authentic to ourselves, we are talking kind of about the person, who we are, living our truth, and kind of keeping secrets from other people. And I feel as though this card, although it is a card that is traditionally seen as like the thief, the con artist, etc., I think that can be applied to our authenticity as well. You know, you're trying so hard to make other people appreciate you and accept you that you are, in a sense, being a con artist. You are being somebody that you're not for the benefit of other people. Normally we view this card as being for the benefit of ourselves, right? That person or ourself being for the benefit of ourselves. But in this case, I feel it can be applied to the benefit of other people. Yeah. And it becomes this tricky middle ground of like, yes, it's important sometimes to keep things close to our chest for our own safety. But also when we see this card specifically, it, to me, asks us to question, are we doing it for our safety, or are we doing it to make other people comfortable? So
Yeah. Even like that card, like, because I view it also as like a colonialism card, like literally camping out on someone's like land and stuff. Yeah. It's like, even then, like, we're not being authentic to ourselves because of other people. Like, you know, trying to stamp their own views and stuff on like our beliefs and our thoughts. But yeah.
I don't know. Hope this helps, guys.
Yeah.
So as stated earlier in the episode, I do have a guest today. And although Maria couldn't join us, I think this is going to be a great conversation. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Joanna Ebenstein, and I am the founder and creative director of a project called Morbid Anatomy, and author of a new book called Memento Mori, The Art of Contemplating Death to Live a Better Life.
She's got no idea what her book's called, guys.
Sometimes I do.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
I
did get sent an early copy of your book, and I have read it, and I loved it, and I'm very excited to talk about this topic. I know you and I have already off camera talked about this a little bit, but talking about death work is something that I think is super important. We've talked about it a bunch recently on the Discord and here on the podcast. And so I'm excited to kind of deep dive into this. So my first little question for you is, why is this topic and subject just so important to you?
You know, it always has been, and I can't really tell you why. I have little explanations that I've developed in answer to this question. I can say that my grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and I grew up, I spent summers with them, and I was very close to them. And this kind of idea of death was something that was not as distant for me as I think it is for a lot of other people in the United States. I would also say, and I'll bet this would speak to a lot of your listeners and maybe yourself as well, that when I was a kid, I loved animals and natural history, and I would keep pets. And when they would die, I would keep them in formaldehyde. And to me, that didn't seem creepy or gross. It just seemed like a continuation of my life. Yeah, see, you understand. And a few other people do too, but some people think that just sounds creepy and horrible. So I think there's a there's a bridge there that I see with a lot of young women actually having done this. I collected roadkill. I learned to do taxidermy. And I should definitely qualify. I'm not talking about like my cats. I didn't put in formaldehyde. Those we buried, but like lizards and snakes and spiders, these things I would keep and admire.
It's not totally out of pocket to put a cat in formaldehyde though. Like they can exist that way as well.
You're preaching to the converted here, but I just wanted to, because I know that might be a stopping point for some people. And I didn't think of that when I was young.
I think they deserve to be freaked out.
All right, then.
I mean, we talk about death a lot on this podcast because unfortunately this is my never-ending soapbox for our listeners. So I think at this point, I mean, I have a scab jar. So really at this point, I don't think there's much that could faze them in terms of this stuff. I will say the first time I brought up the scab jar, they were all like, Robyn, are you okay?
I'll bet more
and the
people
answer
have
is
scab
maybe.
jar. I'll bet there are a lot of people out there that have scab jars, just wouldn't talk about it online.
Yeah,
that's my guess.
It's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, if we're not going to be in this kind of fringe part of society, why shouldn't, like, if we're going to be in it, we might as well do fringe behavior.
I agree with you. I support your scab jar.
Thank you, ma'am. Oh, goodness. So overall, when it comes to things like, first getting introduced to this stuff, obviously you now are teaching courses on it. Like I said, I read your book, which was very in depth on different perspectives, etc., especially cultural perspectives. Why is right now a time that you think that talking about this is important for us as a society?
Well, I think it's always important for us as a society, but I think it's more relevant right now. And I will say, when I shop this book around, the way that they do a lot of books, right, is you write your proposal and then they bring it to a number of publishers who are interested. And so you talk to all these different people. You've probably had that experience. And each of them said that if COVID hadn't have happened, this book wouldn't have been viable in one way or another. They said that. So I think we're going to see a lot more books about this, because I think we're in a moment where death suddenly became relevant to a larger group of people, where they started, people outside of, as you said, like a subculture or, an outsider fringe group being interested in it, because suddenly it was in our face and in our awareness in a way it hadn't been. So,
I talked to another author friend about this recently, and they said very similar, because they're also writing a book, not directly about death, but indirectly aligned with death. And that was exactly what he said as well, is that if COVID hadn't happened, we probably wouldn't have gotten this ability to have the platform to talk about this in such a way.
Absolutely. And I would say, and I think this kind of ties in is, the way that I became kind of academically interested in this subject wasn't until after, I studied intellectual history at university. And when I went to Europe for the first time, right after I graduated college, I was really blown away at all of these artworks and artifacts that combine death and beauty in ways that I hadn't even known were possible. And I'd studied art history and still hadn't seen any of these things. And so I was in these churches and museums, and I began to kind of apply the tools that I had learned as an intellectual history major, which was looking at objects in the past to understand the time that made them, but also to understand the present. So I began to say, okay, there are all these things. There's clearly a ton of them. So this was not seen as morbid in its own time, right? But we don't talk about it anymore. And now we see this entire part of the historical record as bizarre. And so what about us has changed, and why? It's so that images of death, and maybe even death itself, has become morbid and exotic and outside of our daily experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that people look too much to the Victorian period as like the example, the precipice of like the most comfortable with death. And I actually don't agree with that at all. And I'm not going to dive into that too much, but I don't think that the Victorian period is the greatest example of being comfortable with death. I think there's a reality to it, right? There's a lot of nuances there. And I think we have to look outside of Europe, specifically England, to see these amazing cultural even in modern day, like that have such it's an integral part of their culture to be so comfortable with death and dying and the conversations that surround that.
Absolutely. And to that end, Morbid, the organization that I run, has been doing trips to Mexico for Day of the Dead. We did our 8th or 9th this Day of the Dead. And this was
That's amazing.
It is. And for me and for many people on these trips, these were life-changing experiences. I now live in Mexico, which I never would have if I hadn't have done these trips. So to speak to what you're saying, is there are many places around the world, almost every place, I think, has a better relationship with death than the United States so far as I have found.
So that kind of leads me directly into my next question, which is, in writing your book and talking about all these cultural experiences, both modern and otherwise, around grief and death, what cultural impact affected you the most in kind of your relationship with death and dying?
My time in Mexico, for sure. And this would be for a combination of reasons. For listeners who have not been to Mexico, there is, of course, Day of the Dead, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, Dia de Muertos, Day of the Dead, which is a celebration that takes place right around the time of Halloween in the United States. And in fact, there's a bit of a mashup now where there is some Halloween elements in Day of the Dead here.
Right.
But people build ofrendas or altars in the home, and they believe, or they practice, I should say. I'm not sure. I don't think they all believe this, but the principle behind it is that in this time of year, the veil between the living and the dead is uniquely porous. And so the dead can come back and spend some time with the living. And so you see celebrations at the cemetery and in the home and parades and special foods and all sorts of things. And there's also, and I'll bet your audience is already familiar with this, as are you from your interests, there is a Mexican folk saint that I find also I end the book talking about, because I think when we're looking, and I'm looking up at a statue I have of her right now, when we're looking at other ways we could possibly look at death that are more positive, I think she really embodies this. And she is a she, and her name is Santa Muerta, which is saint death, saint or holy death. And this is a Mexican folk saint that has emerged in the past 20, different scholars will tell you how long she's been around. They argue about that, maybe since the 18th century, but definitely become a real presence in the past 20 or 30 years.
I'm literally wearing a necklace that has her on it right now. I'm intimately.
I figured with your predilections, and I would imagine, I don't know much about contemporary witchcraft, but I would wonder or hope, I guess, that that Santa Muerte is a part that you bring in.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing because she is the saint of criminals and the fringe people, and so I argue that she is perfect for witchcraft. But I also think that pop culture has almost made her this other. Do you know what I mean? Because she is a part of folk Catholicism, and so she's kind of become this other embodiment, I guess you could say. We could get into a whole conversation about that, but I personally view her as the other half of the Virgin Mary.
Yes.
It's life and death, right? It's
the part that's missing. And there's a lot of images on the web if you look up Virgin Mary Santa Muerte that she's like the yin and yang that makes up the whole feminine element, right? She's kind of the yin, the hidden part.
I think it's kind of, if we are going to compare it specifically to like a Eurocentric witchcraft, I think she is very similar to like Hecate or like the maiden mother crone, because you have the maiden, the Virgin Mary when she was a virgin being life put into her. Then we have her as the mother, obviously the mother of Jesus, and then the crone.
That's a really great point. I hadn't thought about the Virgin Mary in the context of maiden mother crone and how she is missing that final and how Santa Muerte takes that place. I think that's a really interesting concept. I like that a lot.
Thanks. I've got a really big brain.
Noted.
I have a lot of opinions on that. That is my personal opinion and take on it. I know that a lot of followers of Santa Muerte would not agree with me on that, and that is so they're right. But that is my kind of view on it.
I think it's super interesting.
So in talking about death and grief, to kind of bring it all back, right? If you were going to give somebody kind of a blueprint just to start off with, they're like, what is your opinion on something that someone should do just to get themselves comfortable with this conversation? Because it is a conversation, right? Death is a huge part of our life until the day we die. And that conversation doesn't end.
Yeah. And what I do in the book is I go through a whole process, and I would think it's the process that helped me come to terms with death. I would say that, my interest in death probably came from anxiety. I think that's probably what fuels a lot of artistic, or aesthetic interest, right? But I think the first step I offer to readers, and I think is really useful, is just, first of all, saying, where did your ideas about death come from? Starting to ask questions about your first experiences. How did your parents deal with the death of a pet in your family, for example? Or did you talk about the death of a loved one? Did you go to funerals? Were you allowed to grieve? Was grieving talked about? Basically to kind of, by seeing where your ideas come from, I think that is the first step before you can do anything to allow them to change, And then what I try to do over the course of the book is to offer all these different perspectives on death that kind of echo my own education. So through travel, through reading, through looking at how death has been dealt with in different times and places, opening our mind to the very many ways death could be for us if we had happened to be born in another time and place. And for me personally, what that does, and I hope for the reader as well, and I have heard from some readers that it has helped them do that, it just starts to open up a certain curiosity about it. Like, oh, that's interesting. If I'd been born, I thought this all the time, if I was born in Mexico, where I spent a lot of time in Bolivia, I was dating a guy in Bolivia for a while, and he was, had a master's degree, middle-class guy, similar life that I would have had if I'd been born in Bolivia. And he thought it was crazy that we didn't believe in certain things the way that people in the United States don't. So just being open-minded about belief, I guess, and our ideas about death, and allowing, encouraging people to follow their passion. If there's something that seems really interesting, something from their own ancestral history or something they've always been curious about, like going down the rabbit hole and really learning about that thing. And I think these are the way that soft change happens over time, at least for me. It's not like it does, you don't sit down and say, I'm going to change my attitudes about death. It's more, first, where did they come from? Second, what are all of the manifold ways of looking at death? And then doing certain projects that help you think about how you might be different if you had different beliefs, and how you might want to use this time on Earth. They kind of shifting the conversation from fear of death to this gift of time on Earth and what we want to do with that time, and finding clarity in that, and finding appreciation for that, no matter how short it might be or how imperfect, And so to that end, I start bringing in things such as gratitude, or looking at, the things that we love in our lives, the relationships, et cetera. And then hoping at the end that people emerge with this new, Carl Jung, who is the thinker that I rest a lot of the book on. He is he was a very important psychiatrist. He was the student of Freud and the protege of Freud, and then he kind of broke away. And what he said that I think is really interesting is that because we happen to be born in a particular time where religion does not necessarily answer all of our questions the way it did for our ancestors, we are under the obligation to come up with what he called our own myth of death, right? And by myth, he doesn't mean untrue or true. It really means you struggle with this topic, you study it, you learn about it, and then you have your own beliefs. And those beliefs can't be proven as true or false, but they're beliefs that help you navigate the world. And that's what I hope everyone will come away with by the end of this book, is a clarity, because we all have a belief. We just don't know it until we uncover it, right? And of course, what I argue in the book, and many have argued, is the belief system that we've inherited is scientific, the scientific materialist model, unless we do something to challenge it, right? And that model tells us that death is the end. That's it. And any of this discussion about what might happen after is nonsense. And of course, we just don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody knows what happens after death. And isn't that amazing? And so my hope with this book is that people leave with a curiosity about death that helps mitigate any fear they might have.
And Carl Jung is also the father of shadow work, which is something that the witchcraft community has adopted.
That's super
And I don't think that it is really interesting. And I don't think that a lot of witches realize that shadow work comes from him, and it is a psychological alignment.
Yeah.
And it's something that I feel all of this kind of works into, right? Confronting this looming definite for everyone is a form of shadow work, is it not?
Absolutely. And I do talk about that throughout the book. And what I think is really interesting is Jung believed that, so I assume everyone in your community already knows about shadow work, but the way that he defined it was the shadow is the part of ourselves, and ourselves could be an individual or a culture. And I think that's really important. The part of the individual or the culture that we disdain, that we refuse to look at, that we project outward onto others, right? And so I absolutely think that the main shadow of the culture we live in the United States, and probably in England too, a lot of the West, is death. And so by doing this work on a personal level, we're helping excavate our personal shadow, but we're also doing work to excavate a cultural shadow. And the other thing that Jung says, and I work this into the book too, because I think it's really important for, I imagine a lot of your audience are creatives, and yourself as well, right? People who are producing creative work and are artists or writers or different kinds of makers. And Jung thought that those people, like if you're a true artist, you're kind of naturally inclined towards what the shadow of your culture is, because what needs to happen in a culture is it needs to come to the light. And that's what creatives do. They help bring what is being repressed and denied into the light so that the culture can become more healthy. So by becoming more healthy ourselves and doing creative work around this, we're also helping the whole culture to become more healthy and more holistic and more mature.
Yeah, I had never really thought of it that way, but that's so true. And we talk about things like art as this thing you hang up in your house or, see outside. But the fact of the matter is we're pushed art in our faces every day, whether it's on social media or just advertising, etc. And these kind of barriers get pushed and it shifts the culture. So that makes perfect sense. I never thought of it like that.
And I think it's very empowering. And, I think, in fact, I think my next project is going to be about creativity, because that's really where I ended with the book. When I pitched it, I wasn't sure where I was going to end it, but I really feel that creative work is the answer. I think it's the answer to, or an answer at least, to getting at the things that are buried in our own psyches in a safe and fun way, and also helping our culture. And Jung also felt like the creative drive was an essential part of what it was to be human, and the thing that linked us to the gods. And I bring this up because I think what you're doing in witchcraft is very similar, right? It's this magical creativity. And Jung was very much on board with this concept. And I really, the older I get and the more I look at my own life, the more I feel that there is something about the creative urge when you're following something true in yourself that is, that links us to something in the invisible world, whether we want to call that the unconscious or the spirit world or whatever, however your paradigm is, but brings us to something else and maybe something that we should be doing with our time on earth in order to make the world a better place for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree. So this kind of leads me to my last big question for you. And that was, as you kind of touched on, is that there's a lot of exercises in the book. And I feel like I have a pretty good relationship with death. Obviously, we're talking about it so much, right? But I did find myself struggling with some of these exercises not because I think that I have a poor relationship with the conversation, but more it was, I'd never thought of it like that. Or I'd never been kind of forced to think about this in that way before. And that really shocked me. I was shocked to have that happen. And I know that as an author myself, when I include exercises in books, it's usually because I have done them. And so I benefited from it in some way. And so I was wondering, for you, what exercises did you find to be the most beneficial for your big picture?
Yeah. For me, I love the thought experiments. And that's why I put a bunch of thought experiments in there. So, I've done a lot of studies on matriarchal societies or indigenous societies and their worldview, which on a certain non-rational, non-logical level really resonates with something inside of me. But it's hard as a someone who grew up in a scientifically minded society to accept wholesale, right? So I put in a lot of thought experiments, which is, rather than saying this is true, like what if it's true? What if, or for example, this idea, looking at, I've done a study of death and myth, and I've not found a myth yet, and there might be one out there. So I'm not going to conclusively say they don't exist, but I've not personally found a myth yet in which death is the end. And of course, that is the dominant concept in our society. So one of the thought experiments I have is what are the odds that all of human history had it wrong? And we, in this particular historical moment, that's so problematic in so many ways, has it right.
Yeah.
And that's really the underlying assumption of so much of the materialistic scientific worldview, this arrogance that we've got it all figured out. And oh my God, can you believe the crazy things those people thought in the past, And so for me, the thought experiments are the most challenging, I guess, because it really is opening yourself up to a worldview that we weren't raised in and thinking about what the world might look like if that was true. What if it was true? Even opening your mind to that being a possibility, I think is really powerful.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's part of what I struggled with too, is the idea of challenging myself to view things outside of necessarily where I come, where I come from. Because even though I obviously have this spiritual background, there are things that I'm like, well, that's silly. And so challenging yourself to pause and think outside of yourself is, I think, something a lot of people, even outside of death work, really struggle with.
Yeah. I think that's true. And I don't know if you remember, but right at the beginning, I introduced this principle that I think is really important, has really helped me for that. So there's a thinker, an academic called Jeremy Narby, who wrote a wonderful book called The Cosmic Serpent. And he gave a talk for Morbid Anatomy many years ago. And while we were waiting to get started, I was just asking him a few questions. And basically, he was a very pretty straight, academic anthropologist who went to South America and basically was completely changed by his experience there. And he talks about the indigenous view, for example, that ayahuasca is a spirit that talks to you when you take ayahuasca and has certain lessons to impart, for example, things like this, and how he started to kind of open his mind, not saying that they were literally true necessarily, but the way that he talked about it is he talked about bilingualism. And he said, I speak 3 languages. I speak French, Swiss, and English. And each of them allows me to see a different world through its structure and also allows me to talk about it in a different way. And that's how we began to see different worldviews. And I kind of offered that as something to use when you're dealing with these questions. I think there's something in our mind, in the Western mind, in the monotheistic mind in particular, right? Which is a very either or. Yes or no binary idea of what is true. And what I really loved about his idea, and what I love about looking at different world ideas that I think helps make it a little less challenging for me, is saying, well, perhaps this worldview shows us a complementary part of the world as it is to what the Western worldview. It's not that the Western worldview is wrong. It's just not complete. And no worldview can give us a complete picture, right? No lens can give us a complete picture. So I think if we start thinking in that metaphor and think, well, what does the indigenous worldview tell us that our worldview excludes? And how could we embrace both of those ideas? Helps me, at least, when I'm coming up with an idea that seems to challenge my worldview, to look at it as a both and rather than an either or, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And I think that language is such a beautiful analogy for that. I have seen people in the past talk about dating when you're bilingual, and how if one partner speaks the other partner's language, the other partner needs to learn the other person's language, because you're never going to understand them as a full person if you don't understand their root language. because language is so nuanced. There are things that don't have direct translations. And I think that's such a great analogy for that because it's true.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to mean existentially that everything we think is wrong, right? It doesn't need to be a destructive thing. It can be a gentle thing that helps us grow rather than it doesn't need to be embattled, coming back to this idea.
Right. They can walk similar paths.
Yes. And side by side in a way that gives us a greater understanding, rather than having to figure out which is capital T true. That's a metaphor or a way of looking at the world that through all of this work and through my own journey, I've really come to embody in my life. And it really helps you relax into mystery and possibility in a different way than the way that if something is different than how you think, it means everything you thought is wrong. It doesn't have to be so dire.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that analogy. I think it's so good.
Yeah.
And I think more people need to embrace that kind of, it doesn't need to be this or that.
Yeah. And I think our culture, especially now, right, we're so binary and so divided, and everything is such a giant hammer saying this or there's no nuance and there's no attempt at understanding. And I think there is such diversity in worldviews, and even in our own culture, even in the United States, even in all the people who vote a certain way, there's diversity there. There's no monotheistic or monolithic understanding of a simple thing that I think our culture just doesn't, for whatever reason, we're not taught to think that way, And I think that's saying,
I agree.
I think a study of death or a study of anything, probably this in depth will help you to do, where you're looking at something that's a mystery that's been looked at differently by other cultures.
Yeah, I love that. This has been an amazing chat. Thank you so much for joining. I really hope our listeners take the time to read your book. I loved it. I thought it was amazing. I was very grateful to get sent an early copy. Could you just remind our lovely listeners what your book is called, where they can find it, and where they can find you?
Yeah, so the book is called Memento Mori, The Art of Contemplating Death to Live a Better Life. You can find it anywhere books are sold. If you want a signed copy, you can get it through my organization, morbidanatomy.org. I also teach classes based on the book at morbidanatomy.org. And if you're into these topics, we host dozens of classes, online lectures at Patreon, all revolving around our tagline is right now, we're thinking about death, life, and the in-between. So we do have things in witchcraft, lots of stuff about death, things about all sorts of esoteric thought and all sorts of ideas that haven't been taken seriously. So I hope you'll come join us if you're a like-minded person. Check us out, morbidanatomy.org.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you again so much.
Thank you, Robyn. It's been such a pleasure.
So, Maria, what's stirring your cauldron this week?
Oh, let me tell you. So I know the, sad girlies are going to start throwing tomatoes and stuff at me, but the longer I have a couple things, but right now it's the longer nights. Oh, it's so nice that it's so dark so early. I get to turn on all the lights in my house, the tree, all the string lights, and it just everything lights up like a little fairy world at night, and I really dig it. And I get to light my candles. It's actually getting cold here, so I can light a bunch of candles and not feel like I'm sweating through everything, which is very nice.
That is nice.
Yeah. And I don't know. I've been really enjoying it just because I feel like, I know this sounds really weird and not, I know a bunch of people will disagree with me, but I feel like my days are longer with it getting darker earlier, just because I feel like I accomplish a whole bunch more. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it must be so late. And it's 9. And I'm like, oh, I have a while. I have so much time on my hands to do things.
I have a toddler, so could not relate less to that.
I was there, 13 years ago.
Daylight savings time and getting up at 5 a.m. is killing me.
No, having a teenager is like literally the best thing ever. I love them so much. Good. But the other thing that I am loving is like going to the library. Me and my wife, we've been going like every week and just like browsing, and it's just like we haven't went to one in a while, like because we don't really like the one that is in our town. So we decided to spring for like a membership at the bigger one in the city, which theirs is like humongous. And they have like a bunch of like LGBT like meetings and stuff like that. They do a lot of like community aspects, but also there's just such an amazing resource. Like they even have witchy books that you can borrow, and like, oh no, they offer so much. And I'm like, like when you were like a kid and you would go to the library and you'd be like, oh, I'm bringing home 10 books. That is like literally what we have been doing. And it's been really nice, and I've been really enjoying it. Especially my pocketbooks have been really enjoying it too, because I'm not buying so many books. And now I'll be like only buying my very favorite, not just because I want to read it. But yeah, still buying books, obviously, support authors, but definitely I'm buying my
library is supporting authors as well. So
yeah.
Because they pay to have those books, which is especially on Kindle and stuff, which is a little known fact.
Oh, yeah, Libby.
It actually has to be paid for.
Yeah. So, yeah. And go support your local library, or even go get a membership at a library. You're actually putting money into the library's hands so they can keep going and keep offering like amazing programs. Like, go do it. They offer so much, even tools. Like, you can literally go get gardening tools from them, so you don't have to buy anything. You don't have to buy shit. So, yeah. Take advantage. Yeah. Go do it.
Yes. Support the library.
So, Robyn, what is not stirring your cauldron right now?
Thank you so much for asking.
Oh, you're so welcome.
So, I broke my website.
Yeah, like I just dropped. You just get right to it. Just get it. Tell them the most Mercury retrograde story ever.
So I got an email yesterday that a couple of my links on my website weren't working, and I was like, I'll fix it, easy peasy. And then I was like, well, it's almost season 6 of the podcast. I was like, and I haven't updated my website in a long time. I should work on refreshing the websites. I'll start with mine because mine is the least visited out of the two of us. I made a whoopsie and hit publish instead of save to draft. Totally broke my website it's still not fixed, but it's least functioning in this moment. It looks like shit. It looks like a early 2000s like GeoCities website right now. It looks so bad. So if you guys want to have a laugh, go to tiredwitch.com. But I am the creative juices. I like literally was like just mapping stuff up like out for like creativity, like trying to like to get my ideas out there, and then I fucking hit publish, and now everyone can see it. So that's so embarrassing.
Well, if it looks like GeoCities, you're just being retro. Like,
I'm just being vintage. Retro. I'm being so
Things are
vintage.
It's coming back.
I'm being so vintage. I'm quirky. So yeah, that's super fucking embarrassing. My husband was so mad at me. He was like, because I texted him telling him that there were links broken on my website. And I was like, I should also work on the websites. And I said to him, I was like, I'm probably going to have you make some graphics because he's a graphic designer. I was like, I'm probably going to have you make some graphics for me. I'm like, I'm not going to do it right now. I literally told him I wasn't going to do it right now. And then I was like, well, I've got time. I'll just like fuck around with it. My dumb ass hit publish. So...
So what Robyn's trying to say is leave a Red Bull out for Mercury right now, guys. Leave a Red Bull out.
So embarrassing. I can't even believe I did that. That was so bad. Oh my God.
You're so cute.
Thanks. If you just joined us this week, every week we talk about creatives that we are loving right now. This is anybody that we think is cool. These are not paid for ads, as a reminder. And if you have somebody that you would like us to see and to shout out on the podcast, make sure to send us an email, contact us on social media, but send us the creatives that you're loving right now so we can share it with everyone. That being said, Maria, who are you into this week?
Okay, so I got sent this amazing Oracle deck. I don't think I talked about it on here. Hopefully I didn't. But it's the Dream Song Oracle. And it's just so beautiful. Oh my gosh. Like, just the imagery and stuff like that feels very folklore-ish. I don't know. Like, that's the closest way I can describe it. It's just amazing imagery and like just the rich colors and the illustrations on it. It's like feels very naturey. And you know, it has those gilded edges too. And the cardstock's amazing. But you know, I definitely recommend looking up and seeing if it's your jam. It's definitely my aesthetic. So, but yeah, definitely look it up. I love it. And as I said, the cardstock's amazing. It's by US Games, who, like, I don't know, they've been on a roll when it comes to like decks. They have so many amazing decks to choose from. And compared to like many other publishers, like they're freaking like, they're getting the artists that we need for like Oracle decks and stuff like that. So love that for them. Keep doing it, US Games, because yeah, amazing. Who you loving?
So I'm not even going to try to pronounce this. I'm going to spell it out. It's in another language. I'm not going to butcher it. It's duyguturgok. It will be in the caption. But they teach DIY projects, and one of them that keeps coming up for me that they are doing is taking tin and using the tin to make like little mobiles or wreaths, ornaments, etc. I feel like this, like whenever I see it, I get really inspired that it would be really good for creating like wreaths, ornaments, etc. that align specifically with witchcraft. You could use sigil magic, patterns, etc., etc. And I just think it's really creative and cool and so versatile. And it really applies to us, I guess, indirectly, of course. But I'm like, yeah, I want to do that. I get so inspired every time I see it. I don't have the time. I wish I did, but I'm so inspired by all of it. And I'd really like to make a tin wreath now.
No, like they're so pretty, and I love pressed tin designs. Like
they're just so neat.
I have a few that other people have done, and I don't know, it's so pretty. And yeah, 10 out of 10. I would totally do it myself if I could. Like,
yeah,
I want to find the material and try it because it looks like a lot of fun.
Our listener submission is a creative called rosy.ghost. Again, it will be in the caption. And they do pressed flower ghost art. So like they will paint the ghost or draw the ghost, maybe do some like moons and stars. And then they use pressed flowers to kind of create this scene. And it's very pretty and cute. Like,
no, they're so cute. So cute. So very cute. I always like that when artists like involve like natural world elements with their art. It's like just adds a whole dimension to like their art and kind of makes it like I don't know, it just adds so much texture. It's gorgeous.
It does. People, it gives a dimension creative. And also I don't know, because it is real, it kind of pushes, in my opinion, the drawing or painting to be more realistic. I don't know. It reminds me of Roger Rabbit.
Yeah.
As a reminder, if you have a creative that you think is super cool and that you think that our listeners would love to hear, do shout us out. Give us a message. Email us. Let us know. as always, thank you so much for joining us this week. We hope you will join us again on Friday, December 6th for our Coffee Talk episode, or December 13th for the 18th and final episode of Season 5, which after that we'll be taking a short break and then coming back at you with Season 6. You can keep an eye out on our social media or head to our website, coffeeandcauldrons.com, to find out more information and see what we are up to. And don't forget to join us on November 30th at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time via Patreon for our latest class with Thorn Mooney, the author of Witch's Path and Witches Among Us, and her class on getting unstuck as a witch.
Yeah. And additionally, our Patreon Magical Beginnings offers our special 25-minute part 2 episode, a huge library of articles about witchcraft, a Discord community full of fun events and discussions. Like, we have such a thriving community on there. Come join us. Like, amazing. If you need community and you're missing community where you are at, like, yes, come here.
Get in there.
Get into our warm embrace. And we even have tiers that offer one-on-one conversations with Robyn and myself if you're struggling in your practice and just need more one-on-one help.
Yes. And please, if you are loving our sexy, sensual, chef's kiss voices, take a moment to review us from whatever streaming service that you are listening in on, such as Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And if you are listening to us on YouTube, give us a like, give us a subscribe. We love to have you, and we appreciate you very much. We love reading your reviews and rating us at all, but especially rating us 5 stars helps us to be seen by others. Thank you for everybody who already has and everybody who will in the future. We appreciate you.
Again, this is Coffee and Cauldrons
with Robyn from At a Tired Witch Everywhere,
and with Maria from At Maria the Arcane Everywhere.
She has no idea who she is.
No, I feel like my username is such a cluster. I'm so tempted to change it. It's just a mouthful.
To what?
Magic with Maria.
Okay, we'll get into that another time. You ready to say goodbye?
Yeah.
All right. 1, 2.